All right. Do I have to hit continue, Katie?
Yes, you might have seen a pop-up just letting you know we're recording. Please hit continue.
All right. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Trisha Body, and I have the honor of working at the Southwest Florida Community Foundation and collaboratory with amazing people. And my biggest gift is getting to work within the community with all of the change makers. And particularly in this crisis, it's been just a very hard times, but talking with people has been just a good experience of learning kind of the community that we have here in Southwest Florida and how important everyone is. So I'm extremely thankful to be here. I'm extremely thankful to be here with you. A couple of housekeeping rules that we're going to do. Just keep yourself muted if you can, unless you're speaking. There's also a chat feature where if you have any questions when things come up, please put them in there. We are allotting time to ask some questions if people have them. And also just a note that we will be recorded today, and we do plan on putting this out there afterwards for others to see, because we did have a kind of short notice to get this up, but we did want to provide some sort of information and learning community for our region. So having said that, I want to talk a little bit about what our goals are of the meeting. And first and foremost is to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program and other funding sources to be helpful to our community. We also want this to be kind of a learning experience, so peer learning. Instead of kind of coming off and talking a lot about the details that are coming out, we really want to kind of have firsthand experience on how people have applied for the Paycheck Protection Program or anything else. We are also here to encourage others to get their applications in. That is something we're going to continue to do. We know that there is a tight time frame and that the money ran out very early. And we know that there's a lot of uncertainties about dollars. So we are going to encourage all the nonprofit as well as small businesses and business community to apply. And then just to have a good space to have some open dialogue. So we're really hoping that this kind of agenda makes sense and that it'll be helpful to the community at large. Just as a little asterisk, it's important to know that this is a learning community peer-to-peer webinar, and that it's not legal or financial advice, and that this is experience-based information as well as some of the data that has come out. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. So the only other thing that I really just wanted to kind of set the tone with before we get right into the experience is to talk a little bit about the highlights of the new funding. So based on our understanding, there's about $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, and about 60 billion of it that is going to be set aside for small banks. So this is something really important, and I think we'll get into that a little bit in the experience, but I think it's really important that we know what those new dollars are looking like. And there's also allotted about 60 billion for emergency economic injury disaster loans. So there's also going to be some money for the hospitals, about 75 billion, and about 25 billion for coronavirus testing. So there's a lot of different things going into this new package of money, but we want to make sure that you know that there is money being set aside, and that if you haven't already, we're encouraging you to do that. It is our understanding, based on the information that we've read, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more from our panelists, but that the accessing it is the same as it was prior to when the CARES Act became official. And that we do expect, while we don't know 100%, that the White House will be signing this pretty shortly and possibly today. But again, we're not necessarily, we can't confirm that, but that is kind of the information that we've been given. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of that so it could kind of give a baseline of what we're seeing and we're hearing. But I wanted to turn it over to our panelists. And I really kind of want to make this a very kind of active dialogue to some extent. So I'm going to start with Allison Hussey, from the Executive Director of Crow, to have her kind of go over her experience. I know she has applied, and she can tell you her story and give a little bit more information for that. So without any further ado, Allison.
Yay. Good morning. So my experience, probably like many of you, when it was first announced, my inbox was inundated with webinars, seminars, information about the CARES Act and the PPP, and everyone was being oh so helpful in telling us that we should apply and how to do it and all of that fun stuff, right? So I listened to every seminar, webinar known to man, and was inundated with information, felt very prepared when the Department of Labor put the application up on their website. It was all of 4 pages, 2 of which were the instructions on how to fill out the questions that were very basic, and I thought, this is cake, we can do this. The math wasn't too terribly difficult, and I went to law school because I didn't like math, so I thought I'll be able to do this, and worked with our treasurer at, on the board at Crow, who is a CPA, and we were able to figure out the ins and outs and how to figure out the payroll that applied and times 2.5. I could do that. And we worked on that diligently. Then, of course, during that process, the application changed, I think, 6 times. So even though Lydia's nodding, even though the application went live on April 3rd and everyone in the federal government was saying that it was live, it really wasn't live. But we were working with our bank, Edison National Bank, Bank of the Islands. And every time the application changed, they were sending us information, and every time they were getting information about what they needed, they were sending it to us. So one, I'm going to suggest that you are very good friends with your bank. I think, and John is nodding, we had a great relationship with our bank. I think anybody who was working with Edison National Bank, Bank of the Islands, also Sandcap Community Bank, any of the smaller banks, Busey Bank, I've been hearing really good things about anyone who is working with the smaller community banks. I think the people who were working with the larger banks kind of got lost in the shuffle because there wasn't a voice talking to them. But we were very lucky. I was getting texts from our bankers on Sundays, you know, after hours. You know, on the 5th of April, which was a Sunday, they said, your application is in the portal. So, you know, that was great news to us. And we were very lucky. We were able to get funded, and it was a very quick process. I think we were funded in a week. If you haven't received the funds, I think I read that the House did pass the bill last night, so it's on its way to the president's desk. So now is the time to definitely get your application in the portal. It's not a difficult application. And my experience was it wasn't a difficult calculation either. Now my employees are all, you know, salary hourly employees. We do contribute to healthcare and 401k. Those are all added into the calculation. So those are all, you know, things that you can receive. The other tip that I would suggest that we are doing is when we receive the money, we put it in a brand new separate account. And that way when we use the funds, we will be able to, it's completely segregated from everything else. We'll be able to account for it and hopefully, get the forgiveness for it. And then that if there's anything that we have to pay back, we can, throw that right back and get rid of it and not have to pay any interest or anything like that. So those are my tips. I think Lydia, I don't know that you sent that just to me. I think you sent that to everyone. There's lots of local banks that you can get in touch with. And I would just, even if you just have to open a brand new account with them with $1,500 in it to establish a relationship, it's worth your time and effort to do so. So that's my tip.
Those are great tips. I really appreciate that, Allison. The one about getting in no matter what, I think is really important. And that's what we've been trying to encourage people to do as well. So also,
Yeah.
the first time I heard about putting a separate bank account. So I thought that was a really interesting tip. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So if you don't put it in, you're never going to get any.
Really good advice. All right. Well, Allison, thank you so much. We appreciate you and all the work that you guys are doing in the community right now. I know you guys have had to make some really hard choices and decisions, but I know you guys are doing great work. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thanks.
All right. So Dory Hitchman from the Executive Director of the Bailey Matthews Shell Museum. Would you like to talk about your experience?
Sure. Good morning. My experience was very, very similar to Allison's. We have relationships already, the museum, with Bank of the Islands and with Sandcap Bank. And we were in touch with both of them probably a week or so before any of the paperwork was out, before anyone knew anything. And I echo Allison, if you have a bank that you work with, a small community bank, that's the place to go. We ended up working with Sandcap Bank simply because we already had a line of credit with them for our capital project. And the indications from the SBA were that that paperwork would just transfer over and make our application easier. But I have to say good things about both Bank of the Island and Sandcap Bank. And yes, I think the difference is the small community banks were working that weekend, the 3rd through the 5th. We were back and forth working with them all day Saturday, all day Sunday, so that we were in the pipeline on Monday. So I don't know that, I can't speak for, the larger banks, but I'm not sure that they had the staff that was working on them sort of 24/7 for that first week. So I would echo, if you can find a small bank, if you have a relationship with one of the community banks, that's absolutely the place to go. I'm not sure that the larger banks have sort of figured out how to get the processing done for small organizations. I also did want to point out that one of the things that's coming up now is once you receive the funds, to Allison's point, she's put it in a separate account, you need to be on top of it from day one. The 8-week period that you can spend that money and get forgiven, the clock starts ticking the moment that it's put in your account. And so you have to, and it's not as easy as you think. You say, oh, it's 2.5 times. It's not as easy as you think to spend all of that on payroll, which is forgiven, because they're going to back out. They're not going to include all of your federal taxes, your state taxes, those kinds of things. So roughly 12.5% of your payroll comes right off the top and doesn't qualify for repayment. So you have to make sure, particularly those of us who don't have a big mortgage or a big rent, you have to make sure that from the first day you're accounting for how you're going to spend that during that 8-week time period, and figure out a formula and a chart, and people are starting to develop those, so you don't get to week 7 and say, oh my goodness, we haven't spent this. And people are starting to develop ways of doing that, of bonuses or a number of different kinds of programs. But be aware from day one, as soon as that money is in your bank, your work has started, it hasn't stopped. So that would be my last advice.
That's great advice, Dory. I like the after it's in kind of advice too as well, because I think it can be.
Oops, you're muted. There you go.
I noticed. Sorry. I'm on these all day and I still continue to make that mistake on a regular basis. No, I think that's a really good tidbits in the tidbits about kind of the back accounting afterwards, because I feel like it can be very overwhelming from what I've understood is that people are extremely overwhelmed. But understanding kind of there can be very simple plans in processing these dollars. Maybe that'll encourage people to, apply, right?
Well, and the forgiveness portion of it is still a moving target. I mean, it's not set in stone. It looks as though you can use it for payroll, for rent, for utilities, those kinds of things. But as I say, it's still pretty fluid. Now, the good thing is you have 6 months before you have to repay it, and it's only 0.5%. It's a 1%. So 1% is pretty inexpensive money these days if you have to repay it.
The more I have talked to nonprofit leaders, the more I've realized you've all become extreme PPP experts, more so than it's just amazing how quick and how big that piece of language was, and just how you guys have been able to really kind of absorb that is just amazing. So I'm always inspired. And Dory, thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. Awesome. All right, we have one more of our peers on here today, Lydia Black, the Executive Director of Alliance for the Arts. How are you doing?
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad I get to go before John Talmadge, who is the end-all be-all of all things PPP. John, we appreciate all you're doing in economic development. But I guess I think there's a couple of things. Both Allison and Dory kind of touched on experiences. I think everyone on the call either has applied for PPP or has received PPP. So if there's anybody who has not applied, this second set of funding, which was approved by the House and the Senate, will be approved this afternoon by the President, is going to go even faster than the first. $300 billion across the country is not going to get us anywhere close. So if you know of anyone in the nonprofit sector, encourage them to go ahead and put their application in today. If you have applied, I know Family Initiative, you guys said you've applied. It is now, you are able to apply to 2 places. So if you have yourself in a big bank and you have a secondary account at Edison or FineMark or SandCap or First Integrity or any of these other local banks, you can apply twice, and whichever one is accepted first will kick out your second application. And that was not the case in the first round. So I think it's really important that you do the best you can to get it all out, especially if you have all the documents in hand. We found the application process to be pretty simple. 941s, articles of incorporation, and the issue becomes that every bank kind of tweaked the application, whether they were using a third-party lender or they were processing in-house directly with the SBA. So, but the basis of all of them were pretty much the same. Like Dory said, formula is easy. I think everyone on the call, but since you're recording, again, if they haven't got it in, you got to get it in today, like right now. Because they are, all of the experts and the economists, which I am not one, are saying, by mid next week, we're going to be done with the $300+ billion. So application, everything is out there. There's so much details. I don't feel like I need to talk about that. Those of you who have received the PPP, actually, I'll go back. So apply in 2 places. Local banks are the way to go. They took care of their business people first. The big problem is that our local banks are getting to the capacity of the risk they're willing to take. Does that make sense? So we have some amazing local banks that are not going to be able to process loans. And for all those people that have already put in loans, they're going in before any newcomers with those local people. I'll put an article, actually, I think Tricia put a couple articles that came out between last night and this morning of, how the banks are handling this. If you have your application already in, you have a better chance of then a new person coming in. So my hope is that all of you who have applications get funded in this next cycle. Those of you who have gotten a PPP, we've the same thing, I think, as Dory. We opened up a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th account just for PPP dollars. And as we spend money, 75% of our PPPs payroll. We don't have a mortgage, so we actually didn't accept, we're accepted the full amount of our PPP, but we're using a portion of it as loan to not be forgiven. And they expanded the utilities. At first they were saying only, water and electric, but it is internet and phone. And so that utilities has expanded a little bit, which I'm hoping, like Dory said, it's been a moving target. We just said, hey, listen, we'll take it as a loan at 1%. I'd rather have the loan than, not if it doesn't turn into a grant. Again, the tracking is important. We set up a spreadsheet that basically just says, breaks down 75%, backs out all of those unrelated or unrefundable tax items that the organization is responsible for, and then we're tracking. So we were very fortunate that the PPP hit our bank account the same day as a new pay period. So I don't even have to go back in the middle of a pay period. So I hope that happened to all of you. I just, of all the crap that's happened, it was the one thing we could celebrate. And then keeping track of those expenses. So water bills, wireless, everything, and just keeping track of all of it, because if they do expand it a little bit more, you want to be ready very quickly. And again, like Dory said, it's a moving target. So 3 takeaways for me. You guys covered most of it, and John, the expert, will be coming next, is that if you don't get it in, if something else comes down the pike, you won't be eligible. We don't know if there's going to be a third wave of funding. All the signs point to no, but in this crazy, uncertain world, you never know. So even if you don't get these PPP dollars in the next round, get your application in. You'll be ready for any funding source that comes. We've also used the documentation for SBA, our 941s, all of the accumulated information for donors to show them what we are doing and how we've been affected. So even if you don't get it, there are some ways to use the data that you're pulling to talk to your donors, to talk to your constituents, and in our case, to talk to your members. But I'm very excited to see so many great organizations who have already received PPP. I know about 80% of our arts and cultural organizations in Southwest Florida have received it. And I'm just hoping that the rest get it very quickly in this next go around. And so I appreciate all of you. Thanks for hanging in there and doing the good work. If it weren't for our nonprofit leaders and patrons and artists and people making this tolerable, man, I don't know what I'd do. So grateful to you all, grateful to the Community Foundation, and thanks for letting me be a part.
Thank you, Lydia. That's some really good, again, every time I'm on a phone call or having a conversation with one of our nonprofit leaders, I learn a little bit more about PPP. And I feel like I've read quite a bit, so it's awesome. So we really appreciate it. I love the apply twice theory. And I also liked talking about the small banks. I think that's a really important thing to note. So super appreciative of that. But yeah, so the next person that we wanted to speak to, we actually have 2 people. We have John Talmadge, obviously the director of the Lee County Economic Development Office, but we also have Tatum Walker with John, who's the business developer for partnerships and entrepreneurial activities. So we're hoping they might be able to give us a little bit of an update on what's going on. I know you've got some great resources over there, John, and yeah, we're just very appreciative of you being here and just being a great leader in our community. So if you don't mind giving us a little update, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And listen, the 3 before me are the experts, and that's why we're coming back, because of what they're doing. A couple, large, points to make. And whoever thought we'd be talking about 100 billion and trillion so casually, on daily conversations. When the CARES Act was first passed in the first round of the PPP, there was $1 trillion of applications in the pipeline that first week. So, we don't know if how far the 310 billion is going to go to fulfilling what was already in the pipeline or what's already in each bank's queues. That's why the 60 billion put aside for the community banks is so important, because they were able to restock their liquidity. The Federal Reserve has purchased a lot of the loans from them, so they can replenish their liquidity. And so having that 60 billion probably is a pipeline that is not as likely to be filled up as the remaining amount. In the sectors that most of the not-for-profits would be counted in sort of distribution of PPP, only 1.44 went to entities that were considered either arts or entertainment or cultural or conservation. And some of those are for-profit as well. But you can sort of see the distribution was de minimis. The largest sector that got money was construction trades. They got 14%, 18% of the total amount, and manufacturing, healthcare, accommodations, retail, et cetera. So going to your point, those who have that relationship with the local community banks, the smaller banks, because they're on your board or you just know them, that they're going to have probably a different approach and be a little bit more successful in taking new applications in. Most banks now are at the point where they're, especially Edison and Sandcap, I'll speak for those two particularly, are willing to take applications from non-clients, non-depositors. So that's new. Because they know that there's other people that need to be helped, and they know who got missed. I can't speak to all the local banks, but I know I spoke to both those banks today, and they're going to be taking for non-clients. The other thing is, and the reason that everyone said, be careful about how you're documenting data and your expenditures and whatnot. There has not been guidance given on the forgiveness portion yet. So there will probably be a new application that you'll be required to go through for the forgiveness portion that will be separate from the application you filled. We don't know if your total payroll will be considered, or it's going to be employee by employee that you're going to have to disclose for forgiveness. So none of the banking institutions have been given any guidance yet on what forgiveness would look like. So the more you can segregate your accounts, the more you can segregate the information that you're going to be you're theoretically going to be requesting forgiveness for, the more likely you are to be able to pivot to whatever the SBA ultimately is going to require. The other thing is that on the payroll, only 75% of the loan forgiveness has to be dedicated to payroll. So it's not as if you can use 40% of your loan, forgivable portion of your loan for payroll and 40% for rent or utilities or something like that. 75% is dedicated towards payroll, and then the remaining amount can be used for forgiveness or for, as was said before, rent, interest on a mortgage or utility payments. So if you have a large payroll, there's not that much left over for the other remaining amount. So one of the things we've been coaching businesses and not-for-profits and the banks on is a lot of people are going into this process with the expectation they're going to have a forgivable loan, but at the end of the day, they may just have a loan. And while it's a low interest rate, but it's a term loan for 2 years, you're going to have to find, a lot of people have to find, permanent financing after that 2 years, if they're not able to, fully pay off that loan in the interim. So, be diligent about what you're getting. It's necessary. No one will be getting through this nightmare without it, but be careful what you're taking, and make sure you have a 5-year plan, if you can, on what you're going to do for the part that's not forgiven. So those are some of the sort of the macro pictures. We think, if the president signs the bill today, the money will be transferred to the SBA over the weekend. And while there was a 10-day period that they could pay out in the first round, because so many of the loans are already have been processed by the banks and whatnot, they're expecting to pay out in 72 hours. So for those who have approved applications, you should receive your funding by Wednesday. The biggest problems that we're having with people who are in the queues, and especially with the larger banks, they don't know if they have a complete application. So, if you're working with your local, community bank, you're going to be able to have this, articulated conversation, go back and forth to know when it's complete. But if you're going through an online portal and you're just uploading information to a national lender or to some other, entity where you're not touching somebody, then you're not really sure where your application is. And we've been spending most of our time at the call center this week chasing down banks to try to find out if an application is complete, and if it's not, what needs to be, what's missing for it to be completed. Because that's for the big national, the bigger banks, they're all have online portals. You're not talking to a banker. You're just uploading your data to the web. And so they will, they're getting a lot of emails are being sent and saying, thank you for your application, but they're not saying, you have a completely documented, completed application that we can now submit. So That's one of the problems we've been having. The other problem is that a lot of the people who are taking up PPP applications are cyber banks, equity firms, people that have got into the lending process at the last minute, or the lending business at the last minute, and their websites are promising the world, but you don't know where your application is going. So it's we've had 5 cases yesterday where it was a fraudulent website that people were uploading their data into. So all these are concerns. Lydia is absolutely right. You've got to get it in today, or get it in over the weekend, because when it goes live, it's going to be gone. And we don't know when the 4th stimulus package, or when it will happen, or what will be included in it. So this could or could not be the last round of PPP. Yes, as said, the SBA loan is available. They're replenishing that with $60 billion, but that's a different process, and that's not available to the wider community as easily as the PPP is. The PPP, by the way, is also available to the faith-based community as well, if there's any of those on the phone call.
John, that's a tremendous amount of valuable information for sure. I know that a lot of the questions that I've heard, you answered them in 7 minutes or less. So that's excellent, and I'm glad we have it. We'll keep this recorded, and we'll probably share it as well. I know that you guys have your hotline that you're using. Is that a 24-hour line? Is there? I have the number, and I'm going to put it up in a minute, and will post it as well on all of our social media. But is that 24 hours? What type of calls should we be encouraging
Sure.
people to make?
Thanks, Tricia. Yeah, first of all, we give you the number. It's 533-2273. And it's operating from 8 to 5. It's in partnership with 211 as well. And so we're taking a lot of phone calls on unemployment insurance, PPP, SBA, other general business assistance. And we have, if you're looking for unemployment assistance, we will have a soft handoff with a career source for PIN resets and things like that. We can supply applications, paper applications, and whatnot. And that's the other thing that people should be availing themselves of. If people have had to furlough employees or reduce employees' hours, or you have sole proprietor, subcontract, or contractors, they're all eligible for the federal unemployment portion of the CARES Act, not the state portion, but they should avail themselves of that as well.
That's great. That's really good. Thank you. And Katie put it in there as well, so it's in our chat box. I'm really appreciative to the panelists for kind of giving their perspective as well as their expertise in PPP. I have a couple of questions that I just wanted to kind of raise and start the dialogue, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise their hands. But the first one I wanted to talk about was people who have laid off, nonprofits or small businesses or organizations that have laid off, but are concerned that because they laid off, they can't apply for PPP. Does anybody have like a good answer to that? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I'm curious to make sure that if there is that misconception out there, that people do know what the reality is.
The intention of the PPP is to bring furloughed workers back or laid off workers back, but you're not penalized. So, you can apply for the PPP if you have laid off workers. The only thing that's going to be forgiven is the portion of the loan that's supporting your current payroll. As was said before, it starts the day you're funded for 8 weeks as of right now, and that portion of your payroll will be what's forgiven, or those portions that are eligible for forgiveness will be forgiven. The rest of it will be converted to a loan.
Yep. Okay, that's great. Did anybody else have any other response or comments to that?
And Tricia, the conflict we're seeing already arising, you may have seen, read about as well. If you're the unemployment portion, you're eligible for some, depending on what your income was prior, you could be eligible for up to $875 a week for unemployment or reemployment benefits, and that runs all the way through the end of July. So there's a lot of people who are going to take the unemployment rather than going back to work, depending on what their income levels are. And a conversation Lydia and I've been having is, the need to for everyone to, I mean, especially I'm talking about government, being transparent about reopening and when we can get back to summer camps, and the school system provides further summer education and whatnot, so that people have access to forms of daycare in order to go back to work as well.
Yeah. No, I'm in that bucket of people who are wondering when that time frame will be, for sure. But yeah, no, that's extremely helpful, and I appreciate you answering that question. Does anybody else? Lydia, I see Lydia. Go ahead, Lydia.
Sorry, Trisha. Wrong hand. I have a hard time with the.
Either hand works. Either hand.
Just to follow up with John, we were in the unfortunate position of we did lay off 3 full-time employees right as this happened because of lack of work. So we're able to keep on 7 of our full-time and some of our artists, independent contractors, but missed that. And so we decided to, we know that a piece of what we've requested won't be forgiven because we can't bring those on. So I think it's really important for organizations to look at not only the unemployment, which is really tough in the state of Florida. We still, the government's only seeing about 80,000 applications a week, and it's got a backlog. But it's really important that organizations look at how they're reporting payroll and realizing that the organization is still responsible for paying all of those taxes and paying towards their employees. So it's not just a full government forgiveness program. It's helping. It's an added asset. Like, people think, oh, well, payroll's covered for 8 weeks. That's just not the case. The organization still needs to have funds to put towards that employment. And so we know that we can't bring back everyone right away, but we may be able to add some people to provide content that's now relevant as we pivot and all try to figure out the virtual realm and figure out how we need to work with educational opportunities, how we can work with the school district to, like John said,